Hello everyone, and welcome to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast, your episode-by-episode podcast guide through the classic Transformers Generation 1 cartoon. I am Jeremy Graves, and joining me now in what I suppose is the epilogue portion of our podcast continuity, as it were, my good friend in crime, Mr. Andy Hanley. Good sir, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. I've got an Excel spreadsheet here and I'm not afraid to use it, so I'm very excited.
I won't lie, Excel spreadsheets scare me, so I consider that an actual threat.
Well, we shall see how much of a threat it is in due course.
Folks, as I mentioned, we're kind of now in the epilogue phase when it comes to our planned podcast run. If you listen to our previous podcast, which you can also find on the likes of Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all the podcast services, we've done our best to be on there. You can find the entire archive of our podcast run thus far available on all those platforms. And if you also feel so inclined to want to see us discuss all the episodes of Transformers that we have discussed, head over to YouTube, search for Starscream's Ghost Podcast. You should find our YouTube channel just fine, and you can watch us discuss all the episodes and the 1986 movie if you feel so inclined. But yeah, now that we're in the epilogue phase, Andy, it feels weird saying that. We discussed a little bit at the end of the last podcast, a few ideas we had knocking about, and some of those ideas we're going to be going on to today, which we'll elaborate on in just a few minutes. So if you are a first-time listener of the podcast, we should say from the outset, we're not actually talking about specific episodes today. Like, we won't be covering them in depth like we normally do. So we would encourage you to go back through our archive and delve into one of our shows, or heck, start from the very beginning if you would like to. But one of the things we will be discussing today, Andy, are our respective top 5 favourite episodes from season 3 and 4 combined.
Yeah, it's sort of... I don't know, I had a weird kind of thing doing this because I came up with my top 5 incredibly easily, so now I'm really paranoid that I've missed a lot of really good episodes, and you're going to give me your top 5 and I'm going to be like, oh, why did I not pick these? Like, my number 1 obviously was really easy. Anyone who's been listening to this podcast will not be surprised to guess what that is. But the rest of them, like, I had a few, some brief thought about, like, this one or this one, and then it kind of fell together quite easily, which... You could see, I guess you could look at that two ways. One, it means that there was a lot of not particularly memorable episodes in season 3 and 4, or that there were just some really good standout ones. So take your pick.
Yeah, when it came to my top 5, of which we should say, everyone, there are a few kind of conditions and or caveats we gave ourselves to make this top 5, not just, for example, a possible just all 5 parts of a certain storyline. We've kind of made sure to not go down that rabbit hole. But when it came to mine, I think I pretty much knew my top 5 going in. It was more just ordering them. But that said, though, there were a few on there I ultimately had to cut from what I had written down. And in a way, I'm surprised at what didn't make the cut rather more than what did make the cut, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of the same. Like, there are definitely some of the bigger stories where I was like, yeah, that could... I could see myself putting it in there, but I sort of ended up sort of moving more towards some of the, like, at least a couple of, like, the one-off episodes that were just like, you know what, especially, like, a couple of them that I quite liked at the time, but, like, now I've got some distance from them. I'm like, you know what, those are actually really interesting episodes for various reasons. So, sure, I'll let them go on the list.
Indeed, but we'll be getting onto that a bit later, or soon. We'll figure that out in just a second, because, quite honestly, we've not exactly planned this very much today in terms of what order we're going to talk about this. But the other thing we're delving into is a brainchild of yours, Andy, so I'll let you elaborate, but it involves effectively the most viewed episodes on YouTube.
Yeah, so I was very curious about this because, you know, we've talked quite a lot about these various episodes and what we liked and what we didn't, and I was very interested to see how that meshed with kind of the broader populace and like what people have actually been watching on the Hasbro Pulse YouTube channel as something of a bellwether for like what episodes are popular or what episodes are kind of much talked about. And there's some stuff that you would absolutely expect in these numbers. There's also some stuff that really surprised me. There's also some stuff that made me laugh out loud when I realised why they probably have the number of views that they do. So yeah, I basically went through and compiled the view numbers as of kind of when was it? As of like the 3rd of September, if you want to put an absolute mark on it, and just kind of grabbed all of the view counts, put them all into my lovely Excel spreadsheet so that I can order them by season and episode number and view counts and all of that stuff. And so yeah, I figured I would. Both enlighten people and also just quiz Jeremy to see if he can figure out what some of the most and least watched episodes of Transformers G1 are.
Well, I'll tell you what, with that in mind then, because it has also just occurred to me, that's encompassing all of the episodes on Hasbro Pulse. Yeah. So, from a continuity point of view, for our discussion, why don't we begin on talking about our top 5 episodes?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. And then we can show everybody how wrong we are when we show what everyone else has watched in season 3 and 4.
Exactly. And I will also just note, just for, I guess, just to keep up with my regular introductions and whatnot, when it comes to all of the episodes that we have discussed in the archives of our podcast, we watched all the episodes on the Hasbro Pulse YouTube channel, which is the channel that Andy referenced a few moments ago, simply because it's a 100% legitimate way to be able to watch the episodes. So that's the reason we watched them on there, because why wouldn't you, quite frankly? And also worth noting as well, in terms of a long-term audio archive solution, we do have a Patreon page up, which is at patreon.com/starscreamsghost. We're not charging anything to get any additional content. It is literally just a source to have a long-term audio archive solution. So if you utilize Patreon and you would like to download each of the episodes of the podcast on there, you can do that accordingly as well. So Andy, I will let you choose. Would you like to first of all go from... Would you like to go ascending or descending? And would you like to go first or second when it comes to naming your first episode in the list, whichever order we're doing it in?
Well, let's go from the bottom up, because that's the classic countdown. So let's start at number 5. I'll let you go first, Jeremy, because I continue to be scared that I picked all the wrong episodes, quite frankly.
Well, my number 5 when it came to season 3, and again, there'll probably be some honourable mentions as we go along, probably more so when we get to the actual complete Hasbro Pulse viewing figures more than anything. But for my number 5, it is a... Okay, I will say this about my top 5, Andy. There is only one multi-part story in my top 5.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. I mean, I will say likewise, there is only one multi-parter in mine as well, so I'm now beginning to suspect that we have the same one, but we will see.
So my 5th top, my number 5, I'm just going to say that because I can't think of English today apparently. Season 3, episode 24, Grimlock's New Brain.
Yeah. This
was really, really good fun watching this, and it was almost just a great swan song for Grimlock as well. I appreciate he did appear in a later episode or two, but in terms of just a complete Grimlock story, and almost that random what-if scenario of him becoming incredibly smart and whatnot, it was just a really, really fun episode, and the reactions of a lot of the Transformers as well really made it worthwhile watching.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun one. Like, and I mean, it's... The weird thing about kind of season 3 is there's not a whole lot of Grimlock, but he kind of steals the show whenever he's in an episode, like whether it's him being incredibly dumb like in 5 Faces of Darkness, but also mildly useful at times. I mean, he eats somebody's gun, which is always a useful thing to do. Or whether it's Grimlock dressed up as a waiter, which is still my favourite moment in perhaps all of Transformers Generation 1. And yeah, like Grimlock's New Brain was fun. It was also, I mean, I think we talked about it at the time, it was also an episode where it felt like the voice cast were having a good time with it as well. Like, obviously Grimlock's voice actor was like, great, I get to be like smart Grimlock, this'll be fun. But it sort of felt like everybody involved was just like, yeah, this is a fun idea for a story. And, you know, it's, again, as I said at the time, it's a cartoon classic concept of like stupid character becomes super smart because they get a bang on the head or whatever, or, you know, you do the vice versa of like smart character becomes super stupid. And yeah, like it always works well. It's a classic for a reason, that it's a lot of fun. And yeah, that was a good enjoyable episode. I mean, you know, perhaps some questionable lore about the creation of the Technobots, etc., and how that meshes with everything else in Transformers, but that's not the first time we've had that issue, and not really the last either, so I can afford it that, at least.
And that's also another reason, you just mentioned the Technobots, is that completely unbeknownst to me going in, we just get another combiner team, and it's because of Grimlock. It's like, in terms of the long-standing, in theory, continuity of Transformers, incredibly important in some respects.
Yeah. I mean, it is, and yeah, it's kind of weird to think like, you know, Grimlock's a daddy, basically. If we had podcast titles, that would be this one.
So what about your number 5 then? What did you go for?
Yeah, so mine, this is one of the episodes that, again, I think at the time we kind of mooted that, like, this could have easily not been a Transformers episode, but it was fun regardless, and that was Money is Everything, which was just, it was a good space romp. Like, it had, like, double crossing, triple crossing, probably quadruple crossing at some point, I forget. But yeah, like, it had, I feel like it was a rarity for Transformers as well, in that it really actually honed in on its human characters, and they were kind of the stars of the show, because usually, you know, even the episodes where you have human characters in Transformers, they're kind of not necessarily incidental, but they're just there as like a conduit for whatever else is going on. They normally just make something for the Decepticons to steal or whatever. Whereas this was actually like a proper sort of, you know, human ding-dong as much as anything else. And sort of, you know, it was almost the opposite, where the Transformers were just caught up in all the human shenanigans. And so, yeah, I think I just enjoyed it because it was really refreshing to have an episode like that. And, you know, it played out pretty stupidly in places, but it was much like Grimlock's New Brain. It was just a lot of fun to watch it play out.
Yeah, I just had to quickly look up the episode to remind myself of the space dude, as it were, Dirk Manners.
Yeah, which is also very good like 80s character name.
Yeah, that was a really fun episode, just thinking back on it, and like you said, just the human dynamic between Marissa and Dirk. And just the other Transformers that got involved as well, like a bit of the Quintesson double crossing.
Yeah.
With all of that. It was just really good fun.
Yeah. And as I said at the time, the greatest love story ever told. So, you know.
For my number 4, I went with Season 3, Episode 6, The Killing Jar. At the time if I recall correctly, at the time we saw the episode, we had just come off of 5 Faces of Darkness, because that was the 5-part story, so this was the first story immediately after that. And though 5 Faces of Darkness itself, without trying to potentially say a lot about that in case that's on your list, that it took the show in a few dark directions, to say the least. You know, like Rodimus trying to top himself occasionally and whatnot. But this took it to in a darker direction to a different degree, with the amount of manipulation involved, the fact we got like the sort of the negative zone involved in there, which we never saw again. But it was just a really fun, everyone has to work together storyline in such a unique circumstance. And all the way through us talking about Season 3 and 4, that has still stuck with me quite a bit as being a really powerfully strong episode. And it was really early into the season, so I felt I had to have that on my list somewhere.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I think that was the one that for me was kind of like almost interchangeable with Money is Everything, for much the same reasons as much like Money is Everything. You could have made that episode in any other sci-fi show and it would have been just as good. You know, the whole idea of, you know, kind of being pulled into this black hole, the whole like negative world stuff, like that's kind of like pretty cut and dried, like typical sort of sci-fi fare that is always interesting and a good time. And yeah, that episode pulls it all off pretty well, and with a certain sense of like, I feel like Transformers doesn't really do a sort of impending doom all that often, not in the kind of way that episode does. You know, you have stuff like Ultimate Doom in Season 1, but a lot of it is quite straightforward, kind of, you know, Autobots versus Decepticons, let's have a fight. It's not very often that it has a kind of this sort of external pressure of just like, this bad thing is going to happen to us, how do we get out of this? And so yeah, I think again, much like Money is Everything, it's quite a refreshing episode because it's a little bit different from the norm. You get a little bit of Autobots and Decepticons sort of working together, which I'm always a fan of because it's always an interesting dynamic. And so yeah, and also I seem to recall it was another Toei animated episode, or at least it wasn't ACOM, so it looked incredible after 5 Faces of Darkness.
It was indeed, yeah. And also, having just quickly gone on the TF Wiki page just to double check that exact stat, I also should have made mention of the fact that we got a lot of Cyclonus and Ultra Magnus interaction, and that was great.
Yeah. I mean, and that sort of, I mean, so Cyclonus is like one of the MVPs of season 3, honestly, for kind of being a good character in all kinds of ways. And I feel like that was one of the episodes where you really kind of got a good feel for it, because he's kind of interesting as a character, because he's not just like Galvatron level like lunacy. He's sort of a far more kind of, and he's also not like a kind of Starscream's clone of like, being kind of simpering, two-faced or anything like that. He's pretty straightforward, cut and dried. He is almost a Decepticon Ultra Magnus, like weirdly, because he does stuff by the book. He's super serious all of the time, and he kind of has his value set, and that's kind of it. And so yeah, like him and Ultra Magnus is sort of an interesting double act, because they're both very sort of dyed in the wool, but also kind of practical in terms of getting things done. So yeah, it's a good dynamic there.
What about your number 4 then?
Yeah, so this is one where I definitely feel like I started with this up way higher, and then I kind of let it slide down as I went. But this is my only 2-parter, and it is Return of Optimus Prime, because they brought back Optimus Prime, and weirdly, like, that could have been such a throwaway, like, oh god, we've got to bring Optimus Prime back. Here you go. Here's like an episode where he just reappears, and who cares why, because look kids, Optimus Prime's back. But like, this actually carves out a really good 2-part story around that. It finds some really good high stakes to it. Like, I'm as I said at the time, like, I always like the kind of virus or something that kind of just cuts through everybody. And again, much like the Killing Jar, it's like it removes that Autobot Decepticon sort of designation for a brief period, or kind of, because it's like, well, here's a threat that's bigger than any one side. Like, everyone's gonna have to kind of pull together to try and fix this. And then yeah, like, obviously Optimus Prime comes and saves the day, and it's kind of pretty satisfying. And then the touch plays, and you're like, yeah, okay, that was pretty good. And so yeah, this was my 1-2-parter. Like, it's probably better than it has any right to be. And yeah, like, and again, rewatching it was one of those really interesting, like, so many striking moments just suddenly kind of came vividly back to me as I watched it from when I first saw these episodes as a kid, and kind of like, oh yeah, like, I remember all these lines and all these little moments, and they were all really great, and they all actually kind of stand up, even today.
Yeah, so I'll say it now, this is on my list. I won't say where right now, because, tension for at least a couple of minutes. So I'll add some more thoughts when I get to it, as it were.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of what you said, obviously, I agree with. But yes, I will elaborate more when I get there.
Excellent.
So my number 3, which I'm just going to call it out right, Andy. I'm guessing it's your number 1. You don't have to reveal now, but I think if anyone's listened to the podcast long enough, it's probably pretty obvious, to my mind. That is Call of the Primitives. Call of the Primitives was just, it was a fantastic experience. And ironically, I've only just thought of it, another Grimlock-centric episode, unintentionally, actually. I didn't actually put it on the list with that in mind. But just everything about it, and I think as well all the information that we dug into surrounding it when we recapped it, just really painted this wonderful picture of actually how special that episode is. And I can understand the hype you gave it since our very first podcast of doing this. So, completely deserved, and I won't elaborate too much now, because again, I'm assuming it's on your list, so I won't say everything right now, but yeah, this had to be on my list somewhere, and it made it to my number 3.
Yeah, no, that is fair, and yeah, it is no surprise that it is on my list to come.
So what about your number 3?
Yeah, so this is another one that I really liked as something different at the time. So my number 3 is Web World.
Okay.
Which, again, like, as we've talked about quite a bit across season 3, like, I really like some of the themes that the post-movie kind of timeline set up, especially around, like, Rodimus and Galvatron and their own kind of struggles with leadership and, what the things that became of them during the movie. And so, like, this episode is kind of a bit weird and goofy in places, but I really like the general sense of what it's trying to do, of really digging into kind of like Galvatron as, this reforged Megatron, and kind of the mental mess that he's been left in off of the back of this. And because it's a kid's cartoon, it can't go too deep into its psychoanalysis, but it kind of does what it can. And it's kind of an interesting thing to have this sort of more intense like character study through this very kind of weird and sort of oddly imaginative sort of sci-fi setting of just like basically Planet of the Psychiatrists, which
it's
is
also very heavily Decepticon centric.
And yeah, like it's also like it's very much just based around kind of that character set, and the Autobots barely get a look in. So yeah, it was just a really interesting kind of. Again, that's the nice thing I think, and going through watching all of season 3, like the one thing it made me appreciate is it's a really good season for ideas, like perhaps more so than season 2. Like it has a good grasp of its characters. It has that feeling that it can maybe be just a little bit more mature with its audience, with the assumption that they've grown up, over a couple of years watching this, and so this is definitely one of those like. By far not perfect execution, but really interesting ideas for it to play with.
Yeah, I'm going to say this thought now, just so I don't forget it when I wanted to probably mention it in one of my upcoming episodes, but in general, the season 3 in particular, because Rebirth's its own entity, but this is a really weird analogy to make, but in the context of wrestling, like WWF, WWE and whatnot, there was a time called the Attitude Era in like the mid to late 90s through the early 2000s, and the way it has always been looked at is a really revered thing because it was very, very much aimed more at, say, a college or teenage demographic, and that's really what they latched onto, and they drove their content towards that age bracket, in essence because all those people had grown up out of the kiddie stuff that they'd been around with in the early towards the mid-90s. And in some ways, in a weird way, roundabout way to phrase it, that's what I actually like in season 3 to a degree in terms of ideas. There are a lot more mature ideas in that sense. I mean, heck, look at the Killing Jar. It's got the word killing in the title of the episode. As a precedent, and we would never have got anything like that in seasons 1 or 2. So I do agree with that sentiment that season 3 allowed for a lot of ideas, and I think when I look back on the season as a whole, though it by no means a perfect season, that's one of the strongest parts of season 3.
Yeah, and I think it's the irony that often gets kind of missed with this stuff, and like I think that the WWE comparison kind of sits in the same framework that yes, you can bring in an older audience by doing this kind of stuff, but also like kids are not as naive and innocent as you think, and if you give them that kind of content, like it's always one of the fascinating things, from professional life, etc. Like, you look at anime, and the anime aimed at sort of, a younger audience, like we'll still talk about death and we'll still show more blood and trauma, because like kids still know about this stuff. They're not completely blind to it, and you can still craft stories around that, and it's it will still resonate with them, and I think that's very much kind of in both your example and Transformers. Like, you can build an audience with that kind of stuff, and actually like there is a decent subset of kids that will absolutely lap that up, because if you treat kids like they're a bit more grown up, like they will appreciate that, because I think sometimes kids don't like to be spoken down to particularly, and so you can put in some more adult themes and they will kind of gel with them, and I do think that's kind of what you see here. Having tested the water by killing everyone in the movie, it's like, yeah, these kids, if they're still coming back, they're pretty hardy, so we can go a little bit darker.
So okay, so I need to paint a picture here, because one of the episodes not on my list, which was somehow it's not on there, but I recall really enjoying it, mainly because of the Cobra Commander interaction, and that was only human, and it was really difficult to not put that on here. But there was just a point where it's like, where would I put it? And at the time, Andy, it was gonna be number 1 or 2, because I had that much fun with it. But then it was also partly me just thinking my nostalgia for watching Action Force and G.I. Joe and not knowing there was a G.I. Joe crossover. So in the end, I kind of thought, right, no, only humans got to get bumped. It was really good fun. It's a very G.I. Joe-centric story, but these episodes had to be on my list. And next up, to sort of go back to one that you've already talked about now, my number 2, if I've got my numbering right, tell me if I'm wrong, But it is the two-parter of Return of Optimus Prime.
Yeah.
Because it was just really good fun. But in hindsight, because we've had some time since we recorded that podcast and we could sort of digest it a bit more, looking back on it, yeah, the touch was in there. Yeah, Optimus Prime came back. But like you alluded to, the fact that there was that virus, but it actually made everyone turn evil, and we got to see a bunch of Transformers just outright being evil, maniacal, just things at times. And there was some great dialogue to emphasize that. It added that sense of jeopardy in a way we had not had, but I just remember the fact that there were just Transformers turning evil the whole time. It was just a really, really cool thing about it that made it feel a bit extra special. And the fact as well, it all started from humans. In some ways, it was like, yeah, that would be a very human thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, that's one of the things that I'd forgotten from when I watched that episode as a kid is like the starting point of that virus, because I probably like conflated it with other episodes or just plain forgotten that, you know, it is like a man-made thing, and that whole kind of that whole angle is pretty interesting. But yeah, I mean, much like Grimlock's New Brain as well, it also stands out as a story where the voice cast are having fun with it. Like, you can hear like, oh great, I get to be evil Ultra Magnus. Bring it on. Like, I will absolutely just, you know, lap this up and kind of make the most of it. And so, yeah, like, I think all of that is really good fun as well. So yeah, like, it has a lot of entertainment value, as a result.
And also, because it was that culmination of Prime is finally back, like, for real this time. It was just a great payoff to Season 3. It was almost... Looking back on it, again, there was some proper dross in Season 3 that we discussed, but like we've just said, there were some great ideas in there, and this two-part story was the payoff for going through all of it, in a way. It felt like you were rewarded for just bearing with everything that was thrown at you, whether you liked it or not, and that was a really like nice sense of achievement on like achievement unlock on the Xbox and whatnot type thing. It's like you got that gamer score and such, and it actually felt worth watching with all of that in mind.
Yeah, it's a good piece of closure for the season, like for sure. Like, it's a really strong kind of a strong way to end that, and again, especially when you compare sort of. I mean, Season 2 in particular doesn't really so much end with anything definitive, but Season 3 at least feels like it has to draw a line under some things, and yeah, like there probably isn't really any better way of doing it than the way that it pulls off.
So, if I'm going to guess this correctly, Andy, I'm going to assume your number 2 is my number 1, as it were. I'm guessing. Weird as that may sound. So, what is your number 2 ranked episode? Because if our brains are aligned like I think they may be, but I could be about to be proved completely wrong, we might be about to be discussing the same thing. So what's your number 2?
Yeah, so my number 2 is the other Return of Optimus Prime, Dark Awakening.
Which is my number 1.
Yeah, which is a really, like, that. This is an episode that I'm sure I didn't see as a kid, and perhaps it's for the best. I don't know. Because, yeah, like, there's so much to unpack about this episode. Like, one, again, talking about, it's sort of the recurring theme through all of my picks is a lot of them are like, oh, Transformers doesn't usually do this. And, like, Dark Awakening, a big chunk of it is, like, Transformers does horror. And Transformers does not really do horror ever because, again, it's big robots bashing, 7 bars out of each other and pew-pew lasers. And, like, the opening chunk of this episode is really effectively, like, storyboarded and, blocked out to be a good bit of horror. I mean, poor Daniel. Like, poor Daniel. Like, as if he wasn't, having seen him. And again, it's a really interesting through line, perhaps kind of accentuated by the way we've watched, like, the movie into Season 3 all quite close together, because my memories of Daniel, like, sobbing over the corpse of Optimus Prime were still pretty fresh when we see him, like, being, the corpse of Optimus Prime reanimated, like, looming over him. And it's like, kids having a bad time. I can see why he stole that space shuttle now. He's just, like, gone off the rails. But yeah, like, all of that opening is really good. Again, it plays with some of the really interesting themes of the season around Rodimus / Hot Rod, of just, like, Guy can't wait to get the Matrix out of him and give it back to Prime. He's like, yeah, just please, please by all means, which is doubly interesting because, there's the clear kind of from the get-go, it's like, something's not right here. Like, even other characters are kind of like a little bit like, Optimus Prime's back, this is great, but this is also a bit weird. Whereas Rodimus Prime is basically like, I don't care, take the Matrix, I'm going to be Hot Rod again, this will be great. And so that theme, this is a really good, strong episode for that. And where kind of, again, I think it's the weird thing about the episode order on Hasbro Pulse, because this is almost like the conclusion to Rodimus / Hot Rod's story of like coming to terms with what he needs to be. Whereas kind of, we get this and then we get a whole bunch of stuff like Burden Hardest to Bear and stuff, which is, kind of should really be like a prior exploration of that. But, that's a really interesting angle that really comes to the fore in this episode. And yeah, just like, again, like really good kind of Peter Cullen performance as Optimus Prime, getting to do something a little bit different. Like, it's not just... It's a very different Prime to the one we're used to, who's just like super confident, transform and roll out Optimus Prime. This is a guy who's like, kill me now, basically. But, even outside of that, is really kind of trying to get to grips with like what's become of him and what's becoming of him, which is kind of an interesting angle. And then, yeah, like, I mean, how's that for a closing shot as well? Like, smashed up Optimus Prime flying into the sun. Just to complete the childhood trauma. And like, don't worry, he's back tomorrow, kids, which he wasn't for us. We had to wait for that. But yeah, one of those episodes, I mean, almost even more so than the movie, it's an episode that you look at and be like, how did you get this commission? Like, how did Hasbro look at this and be like, yeah, this sounds great. Like, you're going to bring back the reanimated corpse of our favourite toy and then kill him again? Yeah. Do
you remember how many complaints we got?
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing that's fascinating.
Said Hasbro, obviously.
Yeah, because, you think back into, the whole thing around, the death of Optimus Prime and the whole kind of, fallout of that they would choose that anybody would choose to write this story and submit it and say, I've got this idea. But then that somebody would be like, yeah, sure, bring it on. Let's do this. It's crazy. Like, it almost feels like you're watching like a secret deleted episode that was never supposed to be like made public, but you kind of got to see it, and it's like, oh wow, like look what they did with Optimus Prime in this one. But yeah, it's a really, really great, like, it's a really great episode of Transformers that, as somebody who massively loves the movie and who as a kid was like, this is so cool, they're killing everybody, like, this was very much up my alley.
Yeah, and from how we watched it as well, it's the fact that neither of us were aware of this. So I think the shock value is probably adding a lot to the fact it is my number one of season 3, because honestly, Return of Optimus Prime and Dark Awakening, ask me on a different day, I might flip them around, quite frankly, but it was the shock value, it was how mature, which is what I was talking about when it came to the Killing Jar and whatnot, that this story was. Just how, like you said, how did this get commissioned? And just the darkness of the storyline involved, the manipulation, the literal manipulation of it and everything. It was just one of those stories where I didn't know it existed, and it was an animation quality at times because it was ACOM. Oh my god, my number one episode is an ACOM episode. Oh well, I won't dwell on that. But just the story and everything surrounding it, I couldn't not have this as my number 1/number 2, depending on what day of the week you told me. Not just because Optimus Prime was involved either. It was just literally because of the story, and quite frankly, like we've kind of said in various ways, Andy's, but just the gall and the balls to do an episode like this in a kids' cartoon is quite special.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it goes back to what we were saying about how, you can treat kids with a little more maturity than they often are. Like, you can present this stuff to kids, and maybe they'll have some nightmares. It's fine. All kids have nightmares. But yeah, like, I think it actually uses Daniel quite effectively as kind of a cipher for some of that as well, to just be kind of like, hey, yeah, this was scary, right? But, Daniel's okay. Everyone's okay. It'll be fine. So yeah, like, and again, this season is interesting because it does that a whole bunch of times, but this is by far like the deepest and darkest it goes. And yeah, like this is the moment that really makes me appreciate that they didn't look at what happened with the movie and be like, no, we've got to go back to like season 2 light and airy, Kremzik 2, we can do this kind of stuff and we can keep going with it, which again is sort of part of that interesting debate and the stuff we've tried to dig into about the response to the film and like, was it a failure? Like, clearly on some narrative level there was a feeling that no, this actually resonated with people and resonated with kids, and we can follow down this path a bit. I find that kind of interesting as an angle. But yeah, really good episode.
So your number one, I think we might all know what it's going to be, but is it, Andy?
Yeah, my number one is Call of the Primitives. It remains like this outside of like the movie. This is the one episode that I have rewatched a multitude of times over the years. This is like one of those. It's sort of partly like a comfort food. It's like one of those like, I'm feeling ill and I'm curled up on the sofa and I don't really want to watch anything like that's going to require too much of my attention. I know Call of the Primitives is on YouTube. I shall watch that. So it's definitely like a sort of comfort food for me because it's an episode that I liked since I was a kid. But also it's definitely one of those interesting to sort of revisit as you get older, because I think this and the movie were kind of reasons that I became an anime fan. Because the animation quality is incredibly good. Like, there are cuts of animation in this episode that are probably better than some of the animation in the film. And like, it's kind of like off the chain. And weirdly, it's sort of the weird thing that I guess especially your kid brain does, where I sort of imagine that Transformers always looked like this every episode. And then going back and rewatching it now, it's like, oh no, this was very much an outlier, where like the robots look shiny and that. But no, like it's a beautiful looking episode, and it just has a pretty smart storyline. Again, that sort of continuity of like, look at what the film did well, of like, what if we made basically Unicron 2, but kind of more potent in some ways and far more kind of direct in its assault on Transformers. And then even stuff like the whole Primitives idea of like, well, what if we can kind of bundle together all the animal Transformers from both sides and make them like some kind of special, designation. They are the Primitives. And it's like, yeah, I think as a kid, I didn't even really join the dots on that, of just like, oh, it's all the animal based ones. Right. Okay. I get it. And so, yeah, that's kind of an interesting angle. Like, it has the typical Transformers problem where it doesn't really end the episode very well. It feels a bit anticlimactic. Like, Grimlock literally just hits the rewind button and it's like, oh, well, that's everything fixed, which is kind of, a bit weak sauce. And I think even as a kid, like, I got things like, oh, was that it? But well, the rest of it was really awesome, so I guess that's fine. But yeah, like, this is very much, it's a really good episode, but it's also like, it means a lot to me personally. Is just like, no, this is probably why I have, I might have grown up differently had I not had this episode on VHS, because I wouldn't have been sat nerding out about anime and really good animation. And this was one of the things that taught me what good animation looks like, because especially, a lot of 80s kids cartoons are kind of mass produced and knocked out really quickly. It's pretty unusual to get something with this level of craft in any show. You don't get an episode like this of the GoBots, that's all I'm saying. But no, it's an incredible episode. Like, it is definitely not the best story in Transformers. Like, I think if I was rating this on story alone, if we were talking top 5 stories, like Dark Awakening would bounce above it. Possibly even Return of Optimus Prime would bounce above it. But when you have that complete package of everything else, and even kind of, the characterization and stuff, again, like I say, it's a good Grimlock episode. It's a really good Skylinks episode, in all kinds of ways. And yeah, it's a good time.
So there we go, everyone. That is our respective top 5 episodes of season 3. I mean, look, we didn't put any of season 4 in there, but season 3. So there you go.
I mean, I will say, like, the Rebirth was almost there on my list once or twice. I was kind of like, I think the problem with, ironically, this is the one place where I was saying, like, multi-part stories count as one entry, kind of did it down, because had it been, like, on a per episode basis, I might have argued, like, Rebirth episode 2 might have squeezed in there, maybe even episode 3. You know, they were both kind of in there, but when you take it as a whole, like, I think, you know, you compare it to something like Return of Optimus Prime, like, that is far stronger, like, across the board, whereas Rebirth has some really good high moments, but it also has some bits that are just like, oh, this is fine. And also, like, you know, again, animation wise, it's okay, but it's not amazing, and so it doesn't quite do it. But yeah, the Rebirth is good as well. Like, if we were doing a top 10, it would absolutely have been in there. It would probably have been like 6, 7 on my list, maybe.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because I think for the previous ones we actually did top 5, didn't we, as well? Top 10, sorry.
Yeah, we did a top 10 for season 1 and 2 just because there were so many episodes. And yeah, like, I mean, ironically, because we had this discussion, like, offline to go behind the curtain, and we're like, top 10 is going to be a bit much for just, like, season 3 and the Rebirth. But actually, one of the interesting things of doing this is, like, I could have filled out a top 10. And there wouldn't have been... I thought if we'd made it a top 10, I would have been like, I picked this because I had to. This is number 10. But actually, I think I could have picked 10 stories and been like, no, I can tell you why I liked all of these. Just fine. So yeah, maybe we underestimated. Actually, season 3 is pretty good.
So there we go. From there, I think, yeah, you know what, actually, I want to add one more point, because you were mentioning about having Call the Primitives in the movie, and that really got you into animation. There is like a whole... I can relate to that sort of in a different way, not just specifically those two, but there were loads of just other American cartoons that had, like, really kick-ass intros, for example. Like, one that springs to mind, which I was trying to do a quick search, and I can't remember off the top of my head if it is, but, like, the intro to Thundercats is utterly phenomenal. That animation quality. I want to say I'm sure it's a Japanese production, but I tried to do a very cursory Google and couldn't find out for sure.
Yeah, I feel like at least some of that was like Toei era outsourcing as well. But yeah, Thundercats also like the perfect mesh of like music and animation as well, because that whole intro and song is just phenomenal. Like, I mean, as much as I like all of the Transformers intros, and they're all kind of like dear to my heart in different ways, like if somebody had like, look, I've got a cassette tape with all the Transformers songs on, or a cassette with the Thundercats theme on repeat, it's like, I'm taking that Thundercats thing and slamming it in, because that's the one. Like, that's incredibly good song.
I'm just doing a quick search now just to see.
Okay, yeah, the thing I'm looking at says, Thundercats was created by Tobin Wolfe and Leonard Starr, while its animation was handled by Rankin Bass Productions, a company which often collaborated with Japanese animators when making its numerous TV shows and features. So yeah, it's one of those weird kind of, wasn't directly outsourced to a studio, but it was a studio that very often used Japanese animators kind of below the line in a way where they weren't really credited. So would not be at all surprised if there were a bunch of Toei or other kind of reasonably high-profile Japanese animators actually worked on it uncredited.
And there are loads of other cartoons from around that era as well that had similar introduction treatments. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Probably the Teenage Mutant, well, over here, Hero Turtles, but Ninja Turtles intro, the original cartoon, has also got animation that's super good quality as well. There's loads of ones. I could probably think of far more. GoBots, not one of them, hopefully.
Yeah, but quite a catchy theme song. I'll give GoBots that. I mean, also, like, while we're having this discussion, also, like, the opening scenes to the G.I. Joe movie, by the way.
Oh my god, that entire opening intro sequence, that alone is worth the price of admission if you ever see it at a cinema.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, perhaps some of the best animation ever made. Like, never mind kind of like, you know, 80s cartoons, etc. Like, G.I. Joe, very popular, don't get me wrong, but probably G.I. Joe it's not worthy of that kind of tier of animation, like much like Transformers isn't. It's like, it's insane, you know. So yeah, that's definitely a kind of, if you've never seen that, that's definitely like, go look it up on YouTube just for those first few minutes, because it's bonkers. Again, really good song as well, but like bonkers animation.
I tell you, if you want to hear it, okay, this is just diverging, folks, but if you want to hear a good song, look up the UK Action Force version of the intro to G.I. Joe. It's wonderful 80s synth. It is far better than the original Real American Hero version. It's so good.
I suspect if I hear it, I'll be straight away like, oh yeah, I remember that. But yeah, I can't place it off the top of my head. But you've said 80s synth, so I know I need to watch it at some point.
It's wonderful. It's just beautiful. So from there, Andy, let's go to your beautiful idea that you came up with for how we're going to round off the show this time around. This being Hasbro Pulse's most viewed episodes. Now, what I'm going to do as we go through this as well is I'm going to have the TF Wiki on standby so I can then sort of type in the name of the episode and I can do like a very brief summary as to what the story was as we go along. Because I'm not sure how many you've isolated here and whatnot, but I've got that on standby so we can make sure we give proper context for what people apparently really want to watch on YouTube.
Yeah. I suspect for quite a lot of these, certainly towards the top, you won't need to. Down the bottom, perhaps a little bit more. Although also sometimes maybe not so much. So to start with, then let's make this a little bit of a quiz. There is one episode that stands like head and shoulders in terms of view count. It has going on 1.7 million views. If you think about it logically, it's really obvious which episode this is. Like, what do you think is the most watched episode of all of Transformers G1 on Hasbro Pulse?
I'm just going to say Return of Optimus Prime Part 1. Oh no, in that case, probably More Than Meets the Eye Part 1, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Ultimately, as you might expect, the very first episode is the one that everybody gravitates towards. So yeah, like by a good kind of 700,000 views, it has almost... Well, no, it's going on towards twice the views of any other episode. So yeah, of course, if you're like, oh, remember the Transformers cartoon, you'd go and watch the first episode. It makes sense. So that's number one on the list. Number two... to give you a clue on this one, think about kind of, again, if you're thinking about Transformers and things you liked about Transformers, think about the kind of search terms that you might use if you weren't just typing Transformers into YouTube. Like, what are some of the first things that you might stick in there to find something?
Like robot or something like that.
Yeah, maybe a specific designation of Transformer.
I'm drawing a blank now, sorry, mate.
Like Dinobots, maybe.
Oh, so probably like it's either SOS Dinobots or Desertion of the Dinobots, probably, I'd imagine.
So this is where it kind of gets, one of the places where it gets interesting. So yeah, SOS Dinobots, yeah, like, again, quite a big gap as like the second most viewed, like 917,000 views. But that's the first Dinobot episode, right? SOS.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Hang on.
That is,
Good quick check.
Because that's the one I suddenly couldn't remember. It's like, I'm pretty sure that's the first, that's like the Dinobot creation story episode.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that is episode 6 or so of season 1, if memory serves.
That is episode 7, season 1, yeah.
Oh, I wasn't far off, was I? So, SOS Dinobots. Yes, the Autobots create the Dinobots, but can barely control these new powerful warriors, says the TF Wiki.
Yeah, so there you go. But that, interestingly, like a lot of the other Dinobot episodes, I mean, I'll say like War of the Dinobots is in the top 10, like that's number 9, like 460,000 views. But a lot of the other Dinobot stories, they're kind of in the mid-table. Like, I kind of thought that I might start to see a pattern here that, like, oh, you know, everyone loves the Dinobots, so all of those episodes would kind of bounce up higher. But yeah, they don't kind of necessarily. And, like, once you get to, like, stuff like, you know, Desertion of the Dinobots, which, you know, was a story we really liked, like, that's very much kind of like, you know, lower half of the table, basically, in terms of views. So SOS Dinobots number 2. Number 3 really kind of threw me for a loop because I was not expecting this to come from its forest of isolation.
So, the Omega Supreme episode?
Yeah, The Secret of Omega Supreme is the third most watched episode with 651,000 views. Which,
you see, in a way, that doesn't surprise me because Omega Supreme is just one of the coolest Transformers. And so you would think, if it's The Secret of Omega Supreme, which, if memory serves, that was actually a really cool episode because it showed, like, a lot of the golden age of Cybertron stuff.
Yeah.
And the Constructicons turning on Omega Supreme. So, it doesn't surprise me to a degree, but it being up that high, I guess, is probably what is more surprising.
Yeah, that was a shock to me, because you think about the number of episodes that have, like, Optimus Prime in the title, or Megatron, like, again, the kind of things that people might search for and be like, oh, yeah, that guy. But, like, Omega Supreme, less so. I mean, my comedy theory is that people are searching for some kind of like gourmet meal and like mistyped something, and rather than get like chicken supreme, they got Omega Supreme. I'm like, this isn't helping me with my cooking, but this robot's cool.
Does my Supreme Pizza have Omega 5 in it or whatever?
yeah, that's what I like to imagine. Which, speaking of which, I'm pretty sure why this is number 4, because number 4 is the core. And I'm pretty sure people are just searching I'm pretty sure people are searching for the film The Core and then getting the Transformers episode The Core instead. Because
Megatron tries to drill his way to the center of the Earth while the Autobots take control of Devastator with mind-controlling Dominator discs.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that's just people searching for the Hollywood movie and then getting an episode of a robot cartoon instead. Because I'll also say, like, relatively high up in, like, 24th place, but still quite high, as Child's Play, which I'm sure is having exactly the same issue of people searching for the horror movie and then getting the Transformers episode instead. And so the other interesting thing, which is more kind of well, actually, this shows up more kind of towards the bottom of the top 10 and beyond. But one of the weird things that I found, not quite across the board, more than meets the eye, is like the exception that proves the rule. People watch the final part of multi-part stories more than they watch the first part. Almost across the board. Like, again, Return of Optimus Prime, really good example. Part 2 is number 9 in our chart. Part 1 is down in 13th place. And you see that with, like, pretty much every multi-part story where people have just skipped to the end. They just watch the final part of it every time.
In a weird way, I mean, with the exception of something like a Five Faces of Darkness, which is like a 5-parter, but in a way that doesn't surprise me, because especially with cartoons of that ilk, it might just be people go on to part 1 and try and skim forward to see, like, when does Optimus Prime appear? And then they go, oh, not till the end, I may as well just watch part 2. And then you get a recap of what's already happened anyway. So you kind of get the complete story within an episode in many sense.
Yeah, I think I'm just a traditionalist. Like, how dare you just watch part 2 of something? Like, what's wrong with you? I mean, say, Five Faces of Darkness is another interesting one because part 1 is, like, number 30, and then the rest of it is way down. So people watch part 1 of that and be like, no, that's fine. I'm good. So maybe because it's 5 parts, I don't know. But yeah, so other stuff, number 7 in the top. Well, so let's go through this because, like, yeah, the core is number 4. More Than Meets the Eye part 2 and 3 are number 5 and number 6 respectively. Call of the Primitives is number 7. Like, that is
lucky number 7.
The highest ranking season 3 episode. So yeah, like I'm vindicated. Then we have War of the Dinobots in number 8. Then Return of Optimus Prime. Interestingly, like, squeezing in at number 10 is Microbots, which that was another big surprise to me. That I was not expecting that to be right up there.
Oh, Drunk Megatron.
Yeah, and I mean, again, yeah, you think about it, it's like, again, that's kind of an interesting, like, yeah, maybe that's just like renowned, and so people are constantly like linking to it and being like, hey, check out this time Megatron got blitzed. Yeah.
Just to read the quick story synopsis from the TF Wiki, Perceptor, Brawn, and Bumblebee must shrink themselves to go inside Megatron and retrieve an artifact, the heart of Cybertron, that gives him enormous power.
Yeah, which was never mentioned again after that episode.
But yeah, this is the infamous scene, though, where we do get Decepticons drunk on Energon, which will forever be one of the best things we've ever seen.
Yeah, and again, that was one of my, like, revelations, like, watching all of this for this podcast, because I'm pretty sure I'd never seen that before, and I'm glad that I did. So yeah, and then underneath that, there's some interesting stuff, like the Revenge of Bruticus is next up, like that's number 11, which is like, that's kind of an interesting, much like Omega Supreme, it's like, I get it, like Bruticus is cool, but maybe, you know, again, not something you'd expect over some of the Optimus Prime stories, etc. War Dawn is next after that, which I think comes off the back of...
One of my favourites.
Yeah, and that's been on a lot of VHS releases. You can imagine there's a lot of nostalgia of just like, I remember this from when I was a kid. And then, yeah, it kind of moves into the point there where everything sort of sits pretty kind of close together in terms of kind of who's watched what and viewer numbers. But of course, the other interesting question is, what do you think the least watched episode of Transformers G1 is?
The one I want it to be is BOT from season 2. I think it's a season 2 finale episode.
So I've got bad news for you. That's right, pretty much slap bang in the middle. That's like number 40 on the list. I burst out laughing because I was going through like grabbing these numbers in like actual running order, the order they're in Hasbro Pulse. I burst out laughing when I got to Surprise Party because it was a lot lower than everything else, and I'm like, good, absolutely deserved. Like that episode was dumb as a box of frogs. But that actually ended up not being the least watched episode. Not by much, admittedly. The least watched episode with creeping towards 69,000 views is Only Human.
Really? So the G.I. Joe crossover episode is the least viewed episode on Hasbro Pulse?
Yeah, which probably, I think that's very much a marketing issue, that they should probably talk about that episode a bit. They should probably have just put in brackets at the end of that video, this is the one that has G.I. Joe stuff in it, because then it would probably have been way higher up than that.
I mean, look, for some like peek behind the curtain context here, Andy, when it comes to our podcast in like the archives, I outright say G.I. Joe crossover episode in the podcast title.
Yeah.
Like, I say it because that's, quite frankly, it's an easy thing to say rather than going Only Human. What does that mean? Just the G.I. Joe crossover one, you know?
For sure. And like, I suspect that would be so much higher if people realised. Because, I mean, we didn't really know going into that episode. Like, we were kind of like blindsided by it. And, like, you're more of a G.I. Joe guy than me. So, like, I thought you might have been more aware of that. So, yeah, they've definitely buried the lead there. But
and
yeah,
like
I
we were talking about all the stuff in Japan as well from that episode.
Yeah.
Like when they had like the whole like crossover promotional art that was created, and it turned out to be nothing of the sort.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the bottom stuff, honestly, like season 3 in general has a big dip in kind of views. So pretty much everything towards the bottom of that list is season 3. Like again, Money is Everything, which was in my top 5. That's like way down there. Big Broadcast of 2006. That's way down there. And yeah, like it's just a kind of a smorgasbord of various kind of season 3 episodes. The lowest ranking non-season 3 episode is the God Gambit from season 2, which is another one that was pretty good. I seem to recall.
It was. I can imagine it might be pretty because people think it's gonna be very religious.
yeah, quite possibly.
God Gambit was a good episode though. That was when Astro Train became God for an episode?
Yeah, that was one that I really liked because, well, actually, maybe also why it ranks slowly because it kind of gets quite political. Like it's a pretty thinly veiled cipher for like American politics, which is why it's kind of great when you're a grown up.
Yeah, so here we go. The Decepticons scheme to conquer a race of primitive humanoids by exploiting their religious beliefs, as the TF Wiki says.
Yeah, so maybe a little controversial. But yeah.
It also does feature Cosmos.
It does feature Cosmos, yeah, and that time when Cosmos was everyone's favourite Autobot. But yeah, I mean that's kind of really it. Like, unless you have any kind of specific episodes you're curious about of like how did that move? I mean, there are some interesting ones that you'd think would be way higher just from like reputation. I mean, our titular episode, like Starscream's Ghost.
I was actually gonna say like.
That is like 34th on the list, like 205,000 views. Like that one I thought would maybe have more. I mean, more people watched Atlantis Arise than Starscream's Ghost. That's
probably because people were searching for Aquaman or the Little Mermaid or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
quite possibly. Like there are also like a couple of episodes here where I've seen quite a lot of chatter about like storyboards going on sale recently, and I wonder whether that's like kind of boosts numbers somewhat. But yeah, I thought like Starscream's Ghost would do better. You think things like the Rebirth, like that's way down in the sort of. Again, that's like part 3 is the most watched there, but that's like number 41 in our charts. And yeah, and it's like, some of the Dinobot stories, stuff like Dinobot Island. Like, I mean, we had a good time with that one. That's kind of way down in like 57th place. Megatron's Master Plan, like that's really low. That's like 70, and almost as many people watch The Girl Who Loved Power Glide as Megatron's Master Plan. Which, I mean, again, as we've discussed in this podcast, like Girl Who Loved Power Glide, really good episode as it turns out. But, again, you'd assume people would glom on to the Megatron angle more than that. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess Cliff Notes version, people on YouTube are weird, and there's maybe not as much logic as I expected. Because I thought I'd see some really clear patterns of everything Optimus Prime towards the top, everything Megatron towards the top, everything Dinobots towards the top. But no, it actually doesn't work that way. It's sort of, I don't know, there must be some episodes that people had a real fondness for that people are looking up that is causing some of those to bounce up. Because, More Than Meets the Eye, of course, that's near the top. But, yeah, The Secret of Omega Supreme, kind of weird for that to be there. Microbots, very strange. So,
yeah, but part of me thinks, and this is stemming from our respective professional lives here as well. We've handled YouTube channels before and sort of had to fine tune things and figure out the presentation of it and how things are labeled or the images that there are. When you just scroll through Hasbro Pulse's YouTube channel, not just to be a detriment to them, because quite frankly, all the episodes are on there, so you can't knock them. But when you look at some of just clearly the default thumbnail that's come up when they've uploaded the episode, some of the images you're like, why the heck's that the thumbnail? It's like Dark Awakening. You could imagine if there was a shot of Optimus Prime in the thumbnail for the Dark Awakening episode, those numbers would probably be not maybe tremendously higher, but at least a decent amount higher.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, so yeah, if you had Optimus Prime's smashed up face there, people would be like, what the heck is this? Yep. It's I can't remember whether it's that episode of Starscream's Ghost, it's just some random thumbnail of Octane, and it's it's not even the character that the episode title is about. So yeah, you're absolutely right, in terms of the algorithm, yeah, the thumbnail choices are usually suboptimal for these, and that probably certainly doesn't help. And yeah, maybe I should have looked at what the thumbnail for the Secret of Omega Supreme is, because maybe...
you know what? Give me a second, I'll have a look. Hang on.
Maybe it's something really exciting. Maybe that's just a picture of Optimus Prime, I don't know, giving Megatron 2 fingers or something, and everyone's like, oh, I need to watch this.
That was in season 2, correct?
Yeah, season 2, episode 29 in the overall season.
Let's have a look. So it is a picture of Optimus Prime looking up.
Yeah, so that's probably, the fact that it's a picture of Optimus Prime is probably helpful to it in the algorithm, because people will see that and be like, oh, Optimus Prime, I know that guy.
Whereas the thumbnail for Child's Play, just to give a comparison, it's the boy in the episode whose name escapes me holding a really tiny Starscream in his hand.
I mean, that sounds good, but maybe not for a thumbnail.
But yeah, it's just looking at the thumbnails, actually, some of them are quite random. Some of them are pretty good. It's there's a moment where Megatron's picking up Starscream like he's going to throw him. It's yeah. And that was Hoist Goes Hollywood, that episode. It's nothing to do with the actual thumbnail or the title, but you probably go, oh, interesting.
Yeah. Or they say, again, that was way down towards the bottom echelons. That was number 81 of our 98 episodes. So, neither Hoist nor Megatron throwing Starscream kind of registered with people. So, yeah.
I'll tell you what, out of interest, pick another episode at random, and let's go through a couple of thumbnails for descriptions and just see if we can analyse this a little bit more, because it's mildly interesting.
Okay, well, again, it was another one of your favourites that didn't perform very well, the Killing Jar. Let's see what that looks like.
It's a season 3 Killing Jar. It's Marissa Fairborn behind some purple bars in jail, okay. Just looking a bit just.
I mean, that sounds like that needs a proper YouTube video title that's just all caps, I met this guy and now I'm in jail! ! ! ! ! ! ! ! But maybe that's what they need to start doing with this. It's just The Secret of Omega Supreme. It's I remembered my past and now I'm in a forest or something.
But pick another one at random then.
Yeah, well, let's go up towards the top. Let's tackle Microbots and see if that has some kind of thumbnail that explains why the heck that is in the top 10.
Right, it's a season 2 Microbots. It is a picture of Optimus Prime looking very anime while holding a gun.
Okay, I mean, that might well be part of the explanation then, because, yeah, I feel like there's at least something building here that whenever anything is a picture of Optimus Prime, it's maybe doing better, so... Was
Microbots a Toei episode? Because it looks very good, the thumbnail, in terms of quality.
It's season 2, season 2, episode 11, so...
It looks, for want of a better way of phrasing it, it looks incredibly modern for the time. When you look at it now, you think, oh, that looks recent as a thumbnail image.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, also like, well,
also Atlantis Arise has both Soundwave and Starscream on the thumbnail.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's a pretty solid way of getting some views. So yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things to kind of break it down season by season, I was really surprised and disappointed that like the Ultimate Doom is like season 1's like lowest performing story. I mean, part 1 is done okay, but like parts 2 and 3 are both pretty low. So I thought like as one of my favorite stories, I kind of thought that might do a bit better.
The thumbnail is just the it's Mr. Witwicky just being very gormless in a look. It's like a spark plug.
Yeah, that maybe doesn't help.
In fact, you know what? Actually, wait. Let me see if I can work some magic here. So
there we go.
So I figured just to kind of show off some of this now, it'd be far easier. So we're in season 1 at the moment. Let me see if I can now just zoom in a bit here so we can get a proper look at like the thumbnails and whatnot. So this is more than meets the eye. Like, wonder why more than meets their part 2 might. That's just very simple. So that's actually from the intro. All of those.
Yeah.
So Transport to Oblivion, just to zoom out a tad. It's like I say, they're not really chosen episodes. SOS Dinobots, that's an incredibly
that's
poignant
perfect.
thumbnail.
Like, it's all the Dinobots right there.
Yep. Ultimate Doom, there's the face I was just talking about.
Yep, Spike just shouting.
And I should say, for the benefit of for the audio listeners, we're literally just looking on YouTube at the moment at the thumbnail. So if you want to actually see what we're discussing, encourage you to go over to the YouTube channel. But all going well, you may not hear this bit because I may have edited out the audio-only version. So Ultimate Doom.
Grimlock with a head, but just hard to see.
Insecticons has got the Actually, where was a Plague of Insecticons on your list?
That was I mean that was pretty low down relatively in season 1 as well. Like I mean that was where are we at? Like, yeah, I mean that was like 8th basically in season 1's kind of watch list. It sits pretty much in. There's sort of an interesting gap from like a Plague of Insecticons upwards to a lot of the other episodes. So yeah, that kind of didn't do too great.
Okay, so if we just scroll around the season 2 ones now, it's like the Immobilizer was a great episode, but you look at that thumbnail, it's like Optimus Prime literally shooting a gun.
Yeah, that's what we're here for.
Where's Carly? To carry on that ongoing joke of mine. See, that's a great thumbnail for Traitor right there.
Yeah, and you see, I mean, that's arguably, that's kind of like upper mids in terms of how it performed for season 2. So, but also, I mean, that's a really good episode title, right? Traitor, like, well, I'm curious about this.
See, that's a great image in general on changing gears that's been used. It's actually, for YouTube purposes, it's actually too busy.
Yeah, it also makes it look like Megatron's about to pick up a really baby gears and be like, hello.
So yeah, here's a Microbots one I was telling you about, where Optimus Prime looks very modern by today's standards.
Yeah, he does look very anime.
The 2 Megatron Master Plans one, he's not even in any of the thumbnails. Just at all.
Yeah, they're both just meh dude, so that really doesn't help.
Desertion of the Dinobots, just no Dinobots to be seen anywhere. Yeah. Decepticon Raider where's Decepticon Raider in King Arthur's court on your list? I need to know this.
That's pretty low down in season 2 terms. It's not right down near the bottom, but it's sort of lower third. Like almost 140,000 views. Again, that was the kind of one I thought might do better just because it's sort of notorious and people would watch it just to be like, is it really like people say? But no, people just like hear about it and decide they don't want to watch it.
Okay, we need to talk about the thumbnail for the core.
Yeah, that's maybe suboptimal as a thumbnail.
One of the highest rated episodes because of the likely search function, but still.
Yeah, I mean, again, maybe the thumbnail's working in its favour there, because it's like, that might be a still from the movie, I don't know, I'll click it and see.
So yeah, there's Secret of Omega Supreme.
Which, has Optimus Prime on it, so maybe winning out from that.
See, search for Alpha Trion. They're 3 Transformers you wouldn't immediately recognise if you weren't aware.
Yeah. That's, I think, I mean, that is like the 6th highest season 2 episode in terms of performance, and that's quite a big jump over other stuff. Like, even over, you'd have thought like the Key to Vector Sigma might do better than the Search for Alpha Trion, because that was again like the VHS one, but there's like now like 50,000+ people more watched Alpha Trion.
I like Prime Target's thumbnail. Optimus Prime and the lizard.
Yeah, Optimus Prime being licked by a lizard, basically.
Yeah, Key to Vector Sigma. There is a key. You can see it in shot. Just about. But yeah, so like I say, they've not really been clearly chosen quite a bit. Or selected. They're more just the default thumbnail that's appeared.
Yeah, they've clearly... At best, they've probably picked one from the selection and been like, yeah, that'll do. But more likely, yeah, somebody has just mass bulk uploaded and done with it.
Yeah, so now we move on to Season 3.
Yeah, I mean, you've got like Triptychon in mid-transform in one of these thumbnails,
which is from the middle eye catch, isn't it?
And then Ultra Magnus in some mud.
I like that as a thumbnail. That's by no means intentional, but that's a good shot of Galvatron.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's the Killing Jar one I was talking to you about.
Yeah, not even very interesting bars, but...
Yeah. See, Dark Awakening. This is the Dark Awakening one.
Yeah, and there's just Starscream's Ghost. That was the one I was thinking of. It's just Octane, and it's like, well, that's not
people
Starscream's
going.
Ghost.
Honestly, if you search for Starscream Transformers and this came up, this episode, you would just go, "That's not Starscream."
Yeah, exactly.
Just out of context, Grimlock. That said, this image of Blaster is...
Yeah, lots of just like happy Transformers in Season 3, which is not really the vibe of Season 3.
I'm going to be honest, I have no recollection of this whatsoever in the Ultimate Weapon episode. I have no recollection of the Ultimate Weapon episode, to be quite frank.
Because that was when they repainted Rodimus Prime to sneak into the Decepticon base, and Daniel pretended to be like a plumber or something.
Oh yeah, that one, right?
Like,
yeah.
We're here to fix your pipes, and like, pipes is an Autobot. No, that wasn't how that went, but it should have been. Would have been funnier.
See, Big Broadcast is just... In fact, this is the first time we've seen the Quintessons in any of the thumbnails up to now.
Yeah. I imagine YouTube's algorithm doesn't really know what to do with them, so...
Only Human, that's just that.
I mean, it's a human, so...
Yeah, it's on brand. Grimlock's new brain doesn't even have Grimlock in there.
Yeah, no Grimlock.
A good little shot of Dirk Manus there.
That is actually quite good.
And Call of the Primitives is Skylynx and a couple of the Dinobots.
Yeah, but not the best.
And Return of Optimus Prime doesn't even have Optimus Prime in either of the thumbnails.
No, just humans in both of them. So yeah, if you're watching Hasbro, definitely some thumbnail optimization required here. That's
the word I was thinking of. And as for... I mean, we've got a different problem with the Season 4 playlist here, in that Part 1 is at the bottom of the playlist.
Yeah, that's... I mean, maybe that's why people are watching. Maybe that's why people... This is one of the stories where people actually watch Part 1 first, because they're like, oh, well... We'll watch the last episode, and it's the end of the playlist.
Oh, well, there we go. So, yeah, very fascinating, though. And, like, it's obviously us doing a little bit of spitballing when it comes to, like, perhaps some of the optimization needed, which is the word I was trying to think of a few minutes ago when it came to the thumbnails. But overall, it is genuinely fascinating just to know what are the top ones and what are a bit further down the list. It's genuinely quite interesting.
Yeah, and it's also, like, you know, I'm not sure how long these episodes have been up now, but, like, kind of the median, like, view count is kind of around the 170,000 mark, so it's like, you know, why aren't you all listening to our podcast? Is what I'm asking.
We could probably find out, actually. Hang on, let me do a quick search on their channel. So, More Than Meets the Eye Part 1, I haven't got an exact upload date, but it says 1 year ago.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, that's, you know, I mean, the 1.7 million views in a year. That's pretty good going.
Yeah, I wonder if I can... And Return of Optimus Prime Part 2 was 11 months ago, apparently. So I'm guessing they probably just gradually filter them out.
Yeah, probably. When
I mean, hang on, there might be some more background audio if I do this, but bear with me. I'll see if I can just quickly... 28th of August 2021 is when More Than Meets the Eye Part 1 went up.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So basically, almost exactly a year. A year to the day, give or take.
So it's not kind of like a YouTube about a year ago. It's
Yeah.
Or it's like, it says a year ago and it was actually like, 18 months, as has happened occasionally. So.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's interesting to dig in and see what people watch. Because like I say, some of those things were totally predictable. Some of them I was like, what, really? And so, yeah, it's always fascinating to try and figure out what the heck people are thinking in terms of the episodes they watch sometimes.
So there we go, and I think on that note, Andy, I think we're going to wrap up this almost epilogue part 1 of season 3 and 4, as it were, because next time on the podcast, all going well, it'll probably be a bit more of a video-centric episode, because we're going to be delving into the extras from the season 3 and 4 DVD set that I've got here. There is a quiz involved, so at the very least, that will be made available in audio-only form, but like I say, probably going to be more of a video feature type episode than anything, and we'll see what other facts and things we can get from that. I think there are some interviews on there as well. In fact, actually, I'll tell you exactly what's on there, Andy, as I pick up the DVD that's next to me. So according to the back of the box, it says there is an interactive quiz, auto-assembly 2004 footage, interviews with Lee Sullivan, Andrew Wildman, and Simon Furman, a fan art gallery, character profiles, Easter egg, just one, I guess. There's DVD-ROM content, scripts, desktops, and print and cut out kids' masks.
Yeah, I'm still somewhat insistent that we should print and cut out the masks for the next episode, but that might be too much for us, I guess.
We'll see how our production values go, I guess. Is one way to put it.
I'm not sure. Like unless it's Megatron, it's not going to look great on my black and white printer. So.
So before we conclude, good sir, any other additional thoughts you'd like to convey today?
No, I don't think so. Like it's been a fun little wrap up, and it's been interesting to see that we're mostly in agreement in kind of some of the best episodes of season 3 and 4. So yeah, it's been a fun little epilogue.
Indeed, and for those of you listening and or watching this, if you think we've criminally missed out like a particular episode from our respective top 5s, you can let us know on social media. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram under the name Starscreams Pod. And as mentioned, if you have enjoyed this episode of the podcast and would like to hear us talk about the episodes more in depth, head into the archives of our podcast. We have literally talked about every single G1 episode in depth, and the movie as well if you want to hear us discuss that as well. All of that available in the archives on the likes of Apple, Spotify and such right now. And also, if you did enjoy the podcast and you're a first-time listener, thank you for giving our epilogue a chance. We really appreciate it. And also tell a friend if you enjoyed it, because we'd love more people to discover the podcast and get to know what we think of Transformers, be that a good thing or a bad thing, some people might say. As mentioned, next time it will be more of a video-themed centric episode, but the quiz will at least be made available in audio-only form for those of you who just like to indulge in the audio version. And after that, Andy, we may hopefully have decided what we're going to do after that, because I know we were musing about maybe doing some of the first few episodes of the Headmasters. All going well by the next podcast, we should have that a bit more ironed out, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we still need to figure that out, and we'll see what comes next.
So, on that note, from myself, Jeremy Graves, from him, Mr. Andy Hanley, you've been listening to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. Until next time, take care and speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.